So, welcome everyone to another episode of Talking Data with Joel and Mike, where we take a real data lens to exploring the key challenges that are facing the not-for-profit sector right now. And today we've got a very special guest, Carl Young, who's the General Manager of Fundraising and Philanthropy at Redkite. And so, welcome, Carl.
Nice to see you again,
Yes.
even if it's not in person.
Yeah, exactly. Coffee's always usually a bit better. But
Yeah.
And likewise, welcome my co-host Michael McCatter.
Afternoon.
Afternoon. And so today's topic, which once again we blend data and fundraising together, is really this interesting intersection between of data-driven investment decisions, where the two come together. So, but before we start that specific topic, maybe a quick introduction, Carl, on maybe quickly tell us about Redkite and your role and its mission and what your team are doing.
Well, when it comes to my role, I'm the exec GM of philanthropy and fundraising, but I like to say, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, and I do what I'm told by my team, basically. So I think that's good servant leadership, shall we say. But when it comes to Redkite's mission, in the simplest terms, we tackle the trauma and financial burden of childhood cancer. And basically, if we think about the world today, survival rates for cancer is on the rise, but pediatric cancers are also on the rise as well. But there's a real gap between treatment and kind of psychosocial support. So that's a really important niche that Redkite provides that service delivery from the child right through to the parent. And real niche area, and one of those things that's a bit of a hidden health crisis.
Yeah, but obviously Redkite's got a strong brand and reputation in the market, so it's obviously a lot of important work to be done. So diving into the topic, so what does data-driven investment decisions actually mean to you, or what does it not mean to you?
Again, when it comes to data, I think, as you say, it kind of means a lot of different things. But for me, it's the foundation of good ROI by program, by team capacity and future scale. So really, it's the foundations for increasing your overall net returns. And it's having those insights for objective decision-making, not subjective decision-making. And I feel like I'm jumping into maybe some answers for questions you're going to ask a little later. But when it comes to data-driven investment, it's about getting that buy-in from your team. And often if you want to have their behaviors change, it's evidence-based in data that helps you get that kind of personal investment, let alone that financial investment from the board.
Do you find there's maybe sometimes a disconnect between, say, what we sort of talked about, like below the line type of data, like tools and reporting and that, versus like the above the line sort of like strategy and leadership? So have you seen where it's not worked, like failed, because the two haven't really met in the same place, like they've...
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to data and CAMs and those kind of tools, for me, where it's not worked, often you look at the data and that's meant to be the answer and it's going to give you all the answers. But what's missing is the connection between strategy and business rules and the interpretation of that data. So, so it's really, I think there's another disconnect often with people in my roles. They kind of push it out and kind of go, well, that's your responsibility. And I actually think probably one of the biggest failings in the sector is fundraising directors not having enough knowledge of their own CRMs and how they're interpreting their strategy through the CRM into business rules. And that can sound really simple. And, I'll give an example. I once said, what's your objective with your donors, and or what's a perfect donor to you? And nobody could really answer that. And if you want a multi-channel a donor that's multi-channel, so giving to the major gifts in wills, regular monthly giving, and so forth. You need a system with the business rules that has that overarching strategic objective, but then you can track and empower your team accordingly with the data insights and that soft credits for each.
Mm. Yeah, and I think we've probably seen similar in other organizations where the leadership or the exec are not fully that data savvy, and perhaps then that actually leads to less investment in the data, like they end up like there's only like one or two people sort of managing a lot of data, and then there's creates all these single points of failure. And I'd argue that, yeah, it's kind of a chicken and the egg. Should it be the team educating the exec, or the exec should know enough to actually help guide the teams?
I, I think it's both. I think maybe the other bit of friction that comes out is often fundraisers are relationship managed, and so therefore they don't, so they can be emotionally invested in the donor journey and things of that nature. But you need those components to actually be able to measure that and measure that impact. And so that's that tension between subjectivity and creating objectivity. And a lot of fundraising relationship managers don't naturally, migrate, if that's the right word, to having the data driven insights to demonstrate the impact of their work. And to be really cynical, I think there's a fear about that, because none of us really like to be measured or judged per se. So once you have those data insights, I think there's a fear of performance.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma because the other challenge I think organisations have in this particular space is realising what's the difference between data and information, right? And it's on information that you act on. It's the information that you actually derive judgment and so on. And too many organisations get stuck in the mud / the data world where they haven't, let's just say, refined it or done the proper, as you say, data insights and analysis on it to drive proper information and that an organisation can act on. And so the data is often just presented in a way that is overwhelming for a lot of people, right? And you can't make any real business decisions from it because it's not telling you a story. It's just basically numbers on a page, basically, as opposed to a real story behind what's actually driving those numbers. And that's where I think organisations need to put some more investment in terms of turning that into real actionable insights.
And Michael, I think there's another component in there. It's really fundraisers knowing what to measure as well.
Yes.
And some of that is, basics. Even today, we know that age is a major driver of giving power. But how many of us are educating boards on things that I've been educating people on this for 30 years? I know I look like a spring chicken, but, believe it or not, I had long blonde flowing hair once. I can't remember those days.
Yeah.
But even today, you've got people who come in as relationship managers, and it's counterintuitive, some of the fundraising basics. So again, I think it's not just the CRM component, it's knowing you've got your fundraising data experts supporting the fundraising decision making.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, maybe from a bit of a CRM angle with this topic is like, where do you see, in your experiences, the widest gap between the CRM you sold and the one you actually needed in terms of like the reporting, segmentation, permissions, etc.?
I think it all starts, if I'm honest, I wouldn't be able to kind of say I've had any one CRM fail on me. I think they've all worked where I've had the situation where I can apply the strategy and implement the business rules through it. Where they've not worked so well is probably where they're not a CRM that has a fundraising expert. So I won't name any major agencies at this point in time, or CRM agencies. What I think the fundraising team gets expectations is that the CRM, whichever product is on the market that they're going to implement, they think it's going to solve everything for them. And really, they absolve themselves of their responsibility. I'm being a bit extremist here. I'm not saying they absolve themselves, but they don't have enough. They don't understand their role in ensuring that the CRM is structured correctly. So, for example, we'll talk about moves management, but there's lots of ways of implementing moves management to match the action tracks and get the good data relationship insights that you're seeking. But who are you going to rely on setting that up? Is there someone within the fundraising team that understands the outputs that you want in that process? And are you going to be reliant on the CRM agency to tell you that, which I think is a risk? Or are you going to be able to listen to them and make sure that it meets your organizational needs and even where you are in your growth? So having a wonderful moves management process for a university with a high alumni is going to be really significant. But if you're a small charity and the CRM agency is advocating you need moves management, maybe you don't, because you really got a small portfolio. So you can be oversold for something you don't really need. And I think that's the tension of having experienced fundraisers who know what they need and what to say no to.
Yeah, so interesting is sort of that horses for courses, really. Yeah, and likewise seen where often the CRM is rolled out, but perhaps and sure, yeah, you can't have everything on the smorgasbord, but often very little on the smorgasbord is actually implemented when the CRM is rolled out, where
Yeah.
a lot of the issues start
And
to
then it's your
occur.
financial interface is really mission critical as part of that exercise. And so getting campaign appeal and fund structure, that is really important. And then how are you going to capture that information to make the CRM engine work for you? And often that's divorced from the product.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In fact, right.
because I think the biggest challenge is, well, there's a whole heap of skills, or let's sort of say frameworks in my mind that were very applicable 20 years ago that don't seem to be, that aren't being applied today. And that is, like, for example, in terms of the CRM, right? It's a tool. It's purely a tool. But then it's understanding what that tool can do for you as an organization, and what's the gap, what you want to try and achieve, and what's the gap between the overall framework and the tool. Because it's like saying, I've got a like electric hammer, or a nail gun, right? And I'm expecting that it's going to build a house for me. Well, it's not going to do that unless I know how to use it, right? And I think that's sort of part of the problem nowadays. We and maybe it's the sales process in terms of how a lot of these tools are sold into organizations. They're oversold and not really with the proper light of saying you're going to have to train people, you're going to have people that are skilled, you're going to have to understand what you can and can't get out of a given system. So setting up donor journeys / movement and management and all that sort of stuff, how is that, how are you as an organization going to set that up within that framework, within the CRM, to be able to execute on it? And I think it's been almost like the last 10 or so years where applications are sort of almost been thrown over the fence, and people are having to try and figure out how to use it without the proper level of support or knowledge, right? And the proper training, because training in my mind has been one of the biggest surprising gaps I'm seeing in not-for-profits around CRMs. People aren't trained.
Yeah, and going back to your question about what I've seen fail, Joel, one is kind of fee structure. So how they're sold, and I think there are models now whereby you can pay a fee based on your number of records, not your active constituent base. So even that is kind of disadvantaging those that are investing in acquisition, and then those that are just simple records, and you're paying for people just that latent history. Training, I completely concur. And then the service ability to support them. So if you're a small charity, you're really, up against it, and often sold not necessarily the product that you really need, because again, people think it's going to be the solution for everything and make everything easy, and it's not going to do that. And then there is another one, failure that I've seen as well. To your point, Michael, it's kind of the plugins or the apps for the CRM to evolve with technology and the pace that we're evolving. Yeah. And I think that's a real tension, because I think you've got fundraisers that want to be innovative, but they're dependent on their IT infrastructure.
Yes, yeah. It is some false. There's definitely some areas where people get caught off guard. I mean, the marketplace is an interesting one, where a lot of these vendors or the CRM platforms will say, hey, look, you can get all these apps to improve your overall application and user experience. But the reality of it is, what they don't tell you is that there's no guarantee around the life expectancy and support of those products, right? And so you could install something thinking, okay, I'm going to manage grants, or I'm going to manage this, or whatever it might be, through my platform. Or even you have a CRM that now currently interfaces to your general ledger, and then all of a sudden it's no longer supported, and you're having to then go out and try and find somebody to actually set up that, to build an integration for you. So yeah, no, there's a lot of traps in this particular space, for sure.
Yeah, and isn't it ironic? Data, your CRM and your CRM fundraising database manager, they're essentially the guardians of your galaxy.
Yeah,
they're not empowered or resourced to look after your galaxy sufficiently.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I like that analogy, actually.
So getting back towards like data-driven decisions, and what does good look like? So let's talk about like the ideal, perfect world, maybe, which is where you've got like trusted information, like your attributed performance data available. Like, so when you're in that world, have you experienced like what decisions start to get easier?
Certainly about anticipating assumptive models and scale, and basically what performance metrics are you can really truly hang your hat on. So even something really simple that's happened recently at Redkite was we have multiple Redkite weeks at Servo stations, but no one knew what the average donation was. Once we got those insights, we were able to sort of say, right, if we want to move the average gift, the ask needs to start at $5 instead of at $3. Something as simple as that has brought in extra hundreds of thousands of dollars just on something of that simple. So if your CRM's starting to analyze that other more sophisticated methodologies, then that allows you to do greater investment to scale up your acquisition programs and improve your retention rates.
Yeah, I think in my experience, when you just start to see new measurements of data, that it just starts asking, you start asking better questions, around, well, what if we did this, or what if we did that, and then I think perhaps when you're not seeing that trusted information, you're not even asking the right questions.
Yeah, it's like being in a room, with no windows and no light on, and then suddenly your data, you turn the light on.
Mm. And sometimes it doesn't have to be that magical data. It can just be some
Well, I
fundamental
think
data.
the other thing when I talked about objectivity and subjectivity, otherwise you're going to have your boards having these theories about fundraising, and you can't actually give them the evidence to change their mindset. They'll be coming up with, they'll be looking for the next ice bucket challenge, or they'll be saying that, corporates can do X, Y, Z, and so forth. You need that data to demonstrate what the average gifts are, what the response rates are, what the engagement, amount of work to service a high net worth individual, for example. And the other point that I mentioned, around relationship managers, tracking their actions and using that as real-time data to demonstrate, the value of stewarding someone over time, because they're ultimately going to leave a big gift or even a gift in the will. Having that evidence gets you further investment in the future.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's kind of like, and you've talked about this a bit in the past and also today around, like, really there's some key dimensions of data that's kind of gives you a much more holistic picture around, like you said, like having that sort of longer time dimension, having like all the different programs lined up, the relationships, really having better metrics around that, and then obviously the financial pieces. So which, in your experience, do you think in the sector is underreported the most? Like, like perhaps the obvious one is that a lot of teams and execs do an annual sort of ROI focus, and so therefore time often maybe is less reported on. But do you see across all these key dimensions where perhaps other organizations lack? Or...
Yeah, probably the thing that basically it's probably the net impact of investment and longitudinal returns from that perspective. But it depends very much on the scale and the channel and its maturity. So I think there was something else in your question, if you could just repeat, because I'm just trying to nail exactly where you were coming from there.
Yeah, well, I think it's like there's some really fundamental dimensions to the data, like around time, relationships, having all your programs lined up, and in finance, I think that they're kind of, and so really,
Yeah.
we're,
Yeah,
and yeah,
sorry, it's come back to me what I was thinking. So I think the impact correlation is part of that. So how your investment is actually helping the respective cause and what kind of traction it's having in that area. And then the other one, I've kind of alluded to that already, is the PRM, or the primary relationship manager, actions and outcomes. Again, I've alluded to, I think there's a certain caution about us being benchmarked our performance and then seeing that against, our actions, whether we're a gifting will officer or a major gifts manager. And it's been quite interesting. I often think tracking those actions is, I talk about it being a shield. I remember once I had a high net worth individual, and basically, I was recording all of my actions, and, I had a gift solicitation process in place, and I had a plan, and I'd done all the right actions, and I tracked it, and this donor, had not given, and it was, a six-figure sum, and you kind of already benchmarked and budgeted for that. And what happened, I remember my boss looking over my shoulder. I'm going, look at all the actions I've done. I can demonstrate to myself, let alone the organization, I could demonstrate to myself the actions that I'd taken. And I could have, I could evaluate whether I could have done something differently. But I could have confidence I'd done, things in a timely manner. But from that sparked, well, one thing I haven't done yet, and it was coming to the end of the financial year, and they were an overseas donor as well. So it wasn't easy just to pick up the phone and go, what's happening? So I took an approach to go through their legal counsel, and lo and behold, they said, I'd just forgotten to action it. And the gift came to fruition before the end of the financial year. But what I liked about that was that the data and tracking that through the CRM, if I was unsuccessful, I could have confidence and demonstrate the value of my contribution, and that it wasn't just, well, the donor didn't give and I had no evidence to demonstrate what I was doing.
Yeah. So really, yeah, having that sort of ability to understand and use the impact, or measure the impact, is critical. So conscious of our time, and so I guess my round off with a couple of questions, and a podcast these days without any kind of mention of AI is kind of missing a beat. So I thought I'd ask about so how are you thinking about AI in fundraising and in terms of, because obviously it's super powerful in the way it could be a real natural language interface into the data, and then obviously helping you make better decisions. So how are you sort of thinking about it, both from a positive and a cautionary view?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of the coin. I think you've got to break it down into predictive analytics and generative analytics as well. And they've both got their strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, etc., and threats. Um, I think the first thing people have got to do is not absolve themselves, a bit like with a CRM, of their responsibilities, and that it doesn't give you answers 100% that you can wholeheartedly go, that is accurate. So I think if you're a fundraising expert and you're going to use it from a generative point of view or to do some sort of analytics, you've got to be able to have that sense check of what the outputs are, if they are reliable and so forth. But again, going away, talking about data and data structures, if your data infrastructure is really poor, AI is not going to significantly help you. And I think we can become a little bit dependent that becomes the tool that dictates our decision making, because we're not overlaying it with genuine good fundraising theory and practice. And that's the same with that's whether it's predictive analytics or whether it's generative analytics. Because I think it was the Minderoo Foundation has identified there was a 20% drop in successful submissions because too many of them were was it AI generated, and because it had lost all of the soul and the personality and the actual heart of the submission and the quality of the submission as a result. So I think it can help. And I kind of, in some ways, feel a bit nervous for the younger generation or less experienced fundraisers, because in a way they won't know what not to look for, if that makes sense. So I think it's a little bit of suck it and see, proceed with caution. But I certainly have found it useful from generative opportunities, and certainly from doing some top line analytics. But one thing I'll probably just flag, in some ways, I think, for many relationship managers, it's a really great demonstration that we need relationship fundraisers. And what doesn't get spoken about in this equation to a degree is, what do the donors really want? And, to me, some of the fundamentals of fundraising is that they want one-on-one engagement. And I just don't know if AI is going to give them that unless there's an evolution in the behavior of donors.
Yeah, so it could be some crucial assumptions that are just overlooked, and and creating a disconnect with donors.
I think the on that note, like the human interaction, the relationships is obviously the most valuable aspect when it comes to the charities and not-for-profits and so on, in terms of the how they engage both their donors, volunteers, and recipients. Where AI can potentially come in and help with that is analysing people's behaviours and providing some sort of guidance or let's just say flagging of irregular behaviours, but I don't believe it's going to it shouldn't theoretically replace the importance of people building relationships and doing it in a very as you say, organic sort of sense of the way, right? So and the danger is that as you sort of pointed out, I think some of the younger people coming through may end up relying on it too much, and as a result, one of the things that they'll miss out is the fail fast and learn fast type aspects of life, right? What not to say, how to say it, all those different things, right? And if you're relying on AI, you won't, and things don't go right, you won't you won't quite understand, right? What's, is it AI? Is it me? Or is it, what is it that's gone wrong in that particular process? And so I think it's a powerful tool, but like all tools, it needs to be, used appropriately, and not excessively.
And just one little final point on that, there's the trust factor as well, and there's nothing like that human contact. And I remember a donor basically was making a contribution of 600K and basically looked me in the eye and said, "I trust you."
Yeah.
And that was his words verbatim.
Yeah.
I don't know how AI can replace that.
It can't. Like there's a whole heap of behavioral science and body language science that people are seemingly parking at the moment, but the importance of eye contact, and physical and engagement and everything else that comes along with reading body language and engaging with other people and building trust. One of the biggest ways to build trust is eye contact. So
I'm looking at you right now, Michael.
Yeah.
And you, Joel, you got beautiful eyes. Have I ever told you?
AI can't replace human-to-human eye contact, right? That's the reality, right? People may hide behind, various pieces of technology, but the face-to-face is extremely powerful. I mean, it's evident even in the not-for-profit sector in terms of where do you predominantly get most of your initial new conversions is through face-to-face contact, right? Obviously there's direct mail and all these other channels, but the whole on the street type engagement tends to generate a lot of engagements. Now, the challenge with some of those methods is how do you reinforce that trust and so on without too much overpowering, over super, what's the term, just being too forceful in that selling process, right? But it tells you that human interaction is extremely valuable and important process.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Carl, are you sure I'm really here? That's the question.
Are any of us really here?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
This is a virtual reality environment. Yeah, it's the Matrix.
So, all right. Well, so wrap up with a final question then. So for leaders who, because we've covered quite probably a range of topics really, obviously centered around data-driven decision making, but we've obviously covered CRMs and AI and data foundations, but sort of I think it's led us towards data foundations, this conversation. So for leaders who know that their data isn't where it needs to be, how would you sort of balance like the quick wins against sort of lasting opportunities? Like what would your sort of approach be?
Again, I think it's, focusing on the basics, recency, frequency, value, and age, even those principles, and then looking at which fundraising channels you can scale, appropriately with the data insights that you currently have. Probably not to overstretch, but really know where to target and what to focus on. And so scale takes time, and not overstretch, and not overstretching is based on knowing some of the fundraising fundamentals.
Yeah, no, fairly sound thoughts or experiences. So, all right, well, we'll wrap it up there. It's been really good to have a good sort of deep conversation. Hopefully you've also enjoyed it, Carl. And
next time let me get a glass of wine, and then it'll be even better.
Right, we'll work on that. Yep, we'll but
that's not a bad idea, Joel. I reckon. Yeah, obviously it'd have to be slightly later in the day because well, this is probably not a bad time now. But a glass of red wine or scotch with Joel and Mike.
Yeah. Okay, we might have to change our podcast name. Yep. Yeah.
But fireside chat with Joel and Michael. Sounds
That's
beautiful.
right, yeah. And then what we do is we post out the bottle of wine or whatever prior to, and so the person that we're interviewing, or not interviewing, you're podcasting with, is able to enjoy something that we send out. I like that idea.
Yeah, all right, we're working it. All right, well, thank you again, and thank you to our audience for joining us for another edition of Talking Data with Joel and Mike, and we'll speak to you next time. Cheers.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Carl. Nice.